Welcome to the Nearly Enlightened podcast. I'm your host, Giana Giarrusso. I am joined again by Stefan Burns. Welcome back.
Hello, hello. Thank you for having me back on. Let's have a fun conversation.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you back. We had a lot of positive feedback about your last episode. Everyone really loved it, resonated. And yeah, so we were chatting on Saturday, and I kind of want to bring that back here on the podcast. It's a little bit of a hot take about astrology and just like the healing sphere in general, some things that you are going through in your own kind of healing journey. And I'd love to talk about it here because I think it is so important and it's something that truly resonated with me as well.
Let's light them up.
Yeah, I love a hot take.
Burn them up.
Anything, anything hot take or like that kind of shakes people up is really good. Like this week's episode that just came out today, we actually talked politics and like some pop culture things that are going up. So like I love talking about those hot button topics because I think it's important and I think it's really healthy to have these conversations that are maybe a different perspective or point of view than people are used to. And I think it's important to have those conversations in a respectful way to talk things out because I think that's how progress is made.
I guess maybe my hot take has evolved a little bit too since we last talked because of a few things that I've just been kind of witness to, you could say. And so the main point was just that like I've been studying astrology a tremendous amount since it kind of came into my sphere, and it's really helped me in a lot of ways. And as someone that came in from the more scientific perspective and had a career in geophysics and geology, and then shifted into these more spiritual domains and being more open to all these things and incorporating that into just my worldview, and that went in line with everything that I share on my YouTube channel, which is very educational, informational, and has benefited a lot of people as I get that feedback. Astrology has been super useful, but I just been seeing, I guess this is always a thing, but it just seems to be very loud right now with people like wanting like the exact answer to everything for the future, and like astrology needing to support that, or looking at astrological transits that are unfolding, and some of them you could call quite tense, like all these different squares, for example, which typically is a tense aspect. If you have what's called a grand cross, where you have a square on each quadrant, that's supposed to be very, very tense. But then sometimes nothing really seemingly comes of it. And I think that's because these energies sometimes work in more background, mysterious ways. But there's just like this, let's say an astrologer sees this grand cross and then turns it into this massive thing. Like we are going to see the apocalypse on the 17th of September or something, right? And then what happens is that this person may have a little bit of a following or an authority, and then so someone else runs with it. And now you get this whole feedback loop where no one's really looking at the source material, which is important first off, to actually, let's say, look at these transits yourself, but then also like to feel into them yourself, because just what someone else feels into it doesn't mean that's going to be what you get out of it. And like kind of you connecting to intuition and spirit and say, hey, what is this about for me or for the collective? And so we just get this like runaway chain reaction. And so then everyone gets really worked up and like in a fritz, and it long term, if like these things don't happen, it makes it, you know, astrologers look bad, and then these people are just looking for like the next like big rush, so then they just go right to the next thing. And of course, this is not just astrology. This is really all aspects of our society.
Yeah, and I kind of have a hot take with this, and it's a lot of people who are in this sphere as leaders and doing this work, they're kind of and I said this to you on Saturday, they're kind of clouded by their own experiences and perceptions, and we're not getting like an unbiased look at what these aspects or planetary alignments really mean. It's clouded by personal experiences and point of views. And that's great in some ways, but in some ways it can be dangerous. Like I've noticed, I've stepped back from astrology myself because a lot of the astrologers that you see on Instagram, and on Reels, on TikToks, they are fear mongering. Like I have just seen a lot of that recently. Like, don't go out in the full moon; it's dangerous. And uh, to me, it's like that is dangerous because if that's what you're putting out there and you're planting the seed in people's minds, that this is going to be like a dangerous and like bad day because of the full moon, you're planting that seed for someone, so that's what they're going to attract anyways. So it's like whatever you're putting out there is the frequency that's going to match you. So if you're putting out fear-based astrology, then that's what's going to come back to you as like these fear-based experiences. So that's kind of my issue with astrology, and not just astrology, but just like I think a lot of healers in leadership positions in general is that it's not coming from like these are the facts. These are strictly the facts, and this is what it is. It's coming from this clouded personal perception. Like I don't think God is dropping into your channel and being like, don't go out into the full moon. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe, but like, I don't know. I just don't think that that's the way that the world works. And I think if that's what you're putting out, that's what you're going to attract. So if you're constantly listening to these healers or these astrologers that are putting out these kind of fear-based um, channelings, information, whatever you want to call it, like that's what you're going to call into your fields. And, we live on a planet of duality and we experience the full range of human emotions. So not everything is going to be like pleasant rainbows, sunshine, unicorns. Like I am fully aware of that. I've been very candid about like the last couple years of my life and like the ups and the downs, and every person experiences that. So I think it's really important to have to be deciphering and to tap into that your own heart space. And I think with looking for answers outside of ourselves, that's where like the danger comes in. So if we want to be like fear mongering ourselves, like just be aware of that, like tap into yourself and see how that feels for you. Because I know for me, like listening to some of these astrologers, like I've done a mass unfollowing of different astrologers and just like spiritual leaders in general. Just if
Yeah.
that's what they're putting out, that just doesn't resonate with me anymore. Like I don't know. That's where what comes up for me.
Well, it's interesting because anytime I go out and look at the full moon, I feel great.
I know,
I'll,
same.
I'll, I'll do meditations and spend some time out there. And I mean, it's good to be aware of these energies. And there are times where the energies are more tense than others, like you just mentioned. I mean, that's life. And so it's good to be aware of that. But then there is like this tendency to put on this extra level or layer. And then, yeah, one of the beautiful things about I guess you could say the spiritual community, like whatever that even means, right? But one of
Yeah.
the nice things is that it's fairly decentralized, you could say. Like, you have the church, and you have the Bible, and you have the Pope. That's very centralized. Of course, there's all these little churches doing their own things now too, and kind of breaking off from the mold. But you still see the conditioning with like this, let's just say like the Catholic Church very strongly. But in the spiritual community, it's kind of all over the place. You have like Buddhist beliefs coming in, you have like Hindu beliefs coming in, Zen, and all this stuff like all mixing together. And so it's really cool. So I think in general, there's a lot being done that's right there. But there does seem to be like this undercurrent that people and there's multiple of these undercurrents. Some of them like you call them like underground rivers, where it's like good, like clean, pure information, you could say, or experiences. But then there's others which are definitely polluted, which a lot of like influential people I can tell are tapping into and using for material or for judging, like making assessments on, let's say, the current quality of time, like these astrologers, right? And as someone that has like not just immediately hooked up my pump to these underground rivers to pull water. I've actually gone there as best I can. You know, we're only human, but I've gone there as best I can to actually like test the quality. I found a lot of these are quite polluted. I'm like, there's not really any evidence to support this. At least I haven't found it yet. Or I will then read the evidence that someone then presents for this statement, right? And it actually, that research paper, let's say, does not support what they're saying. It's actually the opposite. And so there's like this surface level that a lot of people interact with, but not many people go deeper, which is a little unfortunate. And it's just surprising to me because, I mean, I feel like I'm almost alone in this journey in looking a little bit below that surface level. Like, how are there, out of, if we just take a percentage of people, right? 10,000 people, let's say only one person is actually going to the underground river and looking at it and seeing what it looks like and sampling it. Why is it such a small percentage? Like that is the spiritual journey, is to like go within yourself, to examine and find these truths, right? And you're not just being given something and fed something and then just rolling with that, right? It's to investigate. You get this information, but then you run it through your own truth filter. And so in many ways that just behavioral pattern that people have that goes all the way back to like, let's say early Christianity has not changed. It's just been given a new veneer on top,
Yeah.
which is, so that's what we really need to change.
Yeah. And so I think we've put a lot of like we've given astrology a lot more power than it needs to have, because I think we are looking
Hmm.
for like that instant gratification of like, oh, I want the answer now. Like I
Yeah.
want somebody else to tell me. You're putting the power outside of yourself. And I grew up Catholic. I went to Catholic school for 12 years. So I studied the Bible back to front, and now I've talked about it a little bit on this season. Like I'm going back through the Bible and reading it with spiritual eyes, and not through like the Catholic lens, but just through like a spiritual lens. And I thought it was so interesting that literally on the first page of the Bible, chapter 1, right there, it says God gave us the sun, the moon, and the stars to tell time. And you talk about like
Mm.
polluting what it means. Like Christians, Catholics now believe that astrology is bad, it's witchcraft, but like it is literally on the first page of the Bible. God was like, here, this is how you tell time: stars, sun, moon. I'm like, how did we get here? How did we arrive that it's witchcraft? Like, that's
But,
crazy.
but at the same time, they'll use the phrase that says there'll be signs in the sky and with the stars and the sun and the moon to say that rapture is coming. So, yeah, I don't know. We're just in a weird place in terms of like humanity, where people are just like so desperate. I guess we're primates, we're monkeys. We like to hold on to things, right? We're used to swinging around in trees, and right now we're in this transition. It seems like, I'm just using a metaphor here, but it's like we leapt off of a tree, right? And we're like swinging through space to get to the next tree. The next tree is going to be full of fruit and it's much more abundant. It has shelter and everything. Let's hope, right? This could be called like New Earth. But right now, people are like reaching out, trying to grasp anything, but there is nothing because it's just air. We are in this age of air. We look at the astrological energies, we know that we're in an age of air. That's going to continue for a while. So maybe that's just our human tendency to try to reach out and grab something, even if there's nothing there. We just have to get comfortable with that.
Yeah, I think that like collectively, like we've all gone through these phases individually of like these spaces of transformation where you're like in between. And I think that's where we are collectively in humanity. And I think that, it's very polarizing. The next couple of weeks, the election is coming up. There's like a lot
Mm.
of division, a lot of just like, again, fear mongering. And we are in that space of like, there's nothing to really do. There's nothing to really do except for be. Like we kind of are in that, we're like in the middle of the pendulum swing.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, and and I also see us like appealing to authorities, and then just recently, like, I mean, I don't have no problem sharing this here on this podcast. I really like, there's a gentleman, a British chap, you probably know him, called Graham Hancock, right? And he talks about ancient lost civilizations, and he's written books. I haven't read the books, though I probably should. Um, but I've watched his first season on Netflix with Ancient Apocalypse, and
It's
I've
so
listened to,
funny. Danielle, who was on just before you this week's episode, she
okay.
talks about this exact show.
Okay, well,
Very
I've
aligned.
listened to some of his podcasts, and I like some of his information. And so when I was back in September, I was invited to a podcast with Matt Bell called the Limitless Podcast, and he's great because he really just provides a very open container, and gives you a lot of space, and will let you fully elaborate on your thoughts, and then comes in with good, interesting things to talk about afterwards, or steers it. And, very nice guy. I think he's a Pisces, so it makes sense. Um, and so I was on his podcast in September, and we had a wide-ranging conversation about all the things I talk about on my channel. It's like 4 hours long. It was great. And then he was telling me that he was going to have Graham Hancock on because he really is into these ancient civilizations and lost history. And Matt has this whole Egyptian vase collection, these ultra engineered and precise vases made out of stone. They don't know how they're made. And so that's like the perfect person to have on the podcast is Graham. So there's like all this controversy around this British chap, Graham, and he's, with archaeologists and everything. And he's upset with the archaeologists for being so authoritative and for trying to like cancel him and this, that, whatever, right? And so a lot of people are resonating with that because that is a current theme right now of like trying to cancel people, censor, whatever. And so there's an upwelling of support for him right now. Well, he went on to the Limitless podcast with Matt, and um, again, we all have our own moods, and sometimes we're here, there, we're more hectic, other times we're more calm, relaxed, but he was just like totally unable to even like catch a breath for just even like a second. And he seemed almost annoyed that Matt was in the room. Like, yes, it's Matt's podcast, but it's almost like he just wanted an uninterrupted 2.5 hours of talking. And when Matt then did come in with a question or something like this, he was just constantly kind of like, yeah, like trying to immediately like get back to him. And we talked about the Schumann resonances when I was on the Matt podcast, the Limitless podcast, and how they could be this information network that ancient cultures communicated with, just kind of through their maybe shamanic practices and things of this nature. So you'd think that'd be an idea that Graham would like love to explore. So Matt proposed it to him, and he just like brushed it off within like just a few seconds. It went right back to his original kind of like tirade against archaeologists not being open-minded and like closed off. And it just put this figure in a new light for me, and kind of put this into perspective, because we have these authorities, and that if they say certain things, we really like them, right? Or because they are touching on some trigger point, but then like the reason that is such a hot stone for this Graham Hancock guy is because he displayed many of the same traits that he is rallying against in that podcast. All of a sudden, it's like, whoa, he basically did the exact same thing that he's accusing everyone else of. Maybe it wasn't done as, as bad, but he couldn't find like 2 seconds to be like, that's an interesting idea. Let's think about it. Or like to let Matt speak. Like Matt was going to read, I sent him a message explaining what they were. He was going to read through that. So there you could actually be like, here's what this is. What are your thoughts on it? And he kept interrupting him to the point where Matt was then just like, okay, know what? Here's the short of it. Gave him like a 10-second spiel, which wasn't sufficient to garner any curiosity or interest, and then just moved right on. And so it's clearly just like shutting down and not interested in exploring these other ideas. And that's kind of the whole point of, for this person, being open to lost civilizations and ideas and technologies and stuff. And so you see that even with these people that are really speaking about that. And so that's just something that happened after our conversation that I've been just kind of meditating on, because I just want to make sure, like personally, I don't fall into that, right? I think it's important for us to not be what we are fighting against.
Yeah. And I think that that is the case for a lot of us, like when we kind of hate something about somebody or don't like something about somebody that's outside of ourselves, like that's usually what we don't like about ourselves. Or like, um, I know that Geminis get a really bad reputation for being like flighty and all over the place, but somebody put it into perspective for me, like using me as an example. It's like I'm really good. Like, yeah, I could have my mind totally made up about something, but if you come to me with new information and I analyze it, like I have no problem changing my mind. And yeah, like maybe it comes off as like flighty or whatever. And I even notice it within this podcast. Like this podcast is now 3 years old, a little more than 3 years old, I think. I think we're going on 4 years.
Ooh.
And yeah, crazy. Um, and some of the things in the earlier episodes I listened to, and I'm like, like, I don't know if I think that way anymore. And I think that that's a really important part of the human journey and learning and growing. And I think it's totally healthy to change your mind and to be open minded and to allow yourself to take in new information. You don't have to take it as the letter of the law, but to allow yourself to be open to, like I said earlier in this podcast, having conversations and being open and respectful. And you don't have to necessarily agree with the person that you're talking to, but you can disagree in a respectful way where both parties can get their point of view across. And then I really do believe that that's how progress happens.
I guess where we are, like the metaphor that popped, the vision that popped in my mind is that like a lot of people are like mice in a cage, right? And maybe you've been raised in this cage your whole life, so you know the cage. And then something or someone or some group, whatever, comes along and is like, here is this new space that you can enter into, right? Let's say the first cage is all about like you're all for the government, let's say, right? There's a billion things that this could be, or all for the church, whatever. And then this other like person or group comes along and says, hey, I have this space for you where it's like anti-government or anti-church or whatever, right? And so the mice are like so happy to go into this new cage, but it just looks different, but still a cage. And meanwhile, there's the other option, which is very much what you and I are talking about, which requires a lot more self-empowerment and for you to confront actual fears and uncertainty, which is just, hey, open up the door and what's outside the cage, because that's a huge space, which accommodates so much and gives you the space to be able to change your mind, right, based on new evidence or just beliefs or experiences, and lets you, explore the world and see other cultures and see how they operate and pick up and choose what you like and all this stuff, right? And so I guess we're still very much in a cage mentality. That's just kind of how I'm seeing it. And I would just like to encourage more people to look at that open door because it's always there, right? To look at
Yeah.
that open door, see what's outside and actually maybe take some steps out of that, because I feel like that's what I've done the past few years, and it's radically transformed my life for the positive. And it's also elevated my perspective. I mean, there's still, of course, always things to do and work to be done, whatever, right?
Yes,
But
absolutely.
definitely, like I have a bit more of an eagle eye perspective now, and so I could have just. I was very excited to see that podcast with Graham on the Limitless podcast because I've been there. I've been talking to Matt. He was pumped up to have him on. He just released this Ancient Apocalypse show. It's like, this is great. More info. Hopefully new research came out. The show so far is good, but now I'm kind of a little turned off from it just from this whole thing. Um, but then like kind of I was still able to see the currents that were unfolding. I wasn't so blind and so in that camp to not kind of see some of these dynamics play out. And I kind of felt for my buddy Matt because it's like I felt like he wasn't being respected either in that instance, and it just rubbed me the wrong way. And you see that with a lot of things, and it's
Yeah.
just a mindfulness thing. It's just a mindfulness thing. That's what it is. Are you just mindful of the other person or your space, your environment, and
And I think remembering too that these people of authority are human beings. Like a lot of times we tend to put teachers, any kind of teachers, not just spiritual teachers, but just any kind of authority figure, we tend to put them up on pedestals, forgetting that they're human. And I've seen it a lot in the yoga world where it's like, ooh, this big teacher, big fancy teacher, like we're putting like they're infallible, they can do no wrong, like they're amazing. But like then you really get to know them and you're reminded like, oh, they're human, they're still battling the ego too. And
Yeah.
I think that's probably what came up. I mean, I haven't listened to the podcast, and I'm actually like, I only know the show because my friend Danielle, who was on the podcast before you, she was talking about it. So I'm not really like too familiar with it, but it sounds like it's coming from a place of like ego and constantly being put up on that pedestal where it like gives you this God complex of like, just like what I say goes. And I don't know, there's no room for that in the spiritual world. And I think we're moving beyond it societally too. Like there's just no room for that energy anymore.
Yeah. I mean, that's one reason I've been analyzing it is because, I mean, as we talked about at the very beginning, like those things that kind of trigger you, there's a little bit of that in yourself. So, I mean, my YouTube channel is starting to become successful and I can see that dynamic start. It could very well play out, but I'm young and still like, let's get this formatted properly now. I really want to see this clearly so then I don't fall into this dynamic myself. And that's really the idea. And like I recognize that he's just a human being as anyone is. And so, it's not the end of the world. And it's really just like, just do or watch or read what resonates with you. And that's the simple end of
Yeah.
it. You
Flexing
don't
that
need,
discernment muscle is important.
yeah, and you don't need to keep going with it either. So, and I guess that's just, we have these things that are trying to constantly pull us in. So like this example I gave is kind of in my life trying to pull me in, right? You could say they're like these vortices, but politics is a huge one, right? For like most people. And I think a lot of the battle is honestly just recognizing the vortex for what it is, seeing it, that you're trapped in it, and then just making intentional, like putting intention towards swimming out of that vortex. And it may not happen overnight, but with time, you will then get outside that whirlpool and all of a sudden the water's calm, your mind is calm. And that's really, I mean, half the battle just being like, not battle, but just being comfortable with yourself is being able to be in silence with yourself and not have to constantly be distracting yourself for everything. So we need to kind of remove ourselves from these vortices and then just have that experience of stillness outside of them to then kind of get closer to those experiences of like Satori, right? Where it's like temporary enlightenment, where you're in a flow state and you're not thinking about all these things that are worrying you. You're just completely enmeshed in the present, in the now. And anyone can access that pretty easily if they've channeled their energy and focus towards creative projects or things that really light them up, their passions, etc.
And it's a practice. This is what I remind students in my yoga classes all the time. Like you come here so I can push you outside of your comfort zone. Like, if I know so many people, I hold you in goddess, I hold you in chair pose for a really long time. Like people are throwing hate my way. And I keep reminding people, like, first of all, this is temporary. This too shall pass. Second of all, you're here. So I push you out of your comfort zone. Your brain is telling you to come out. That's a lie. You can stay. You're strong enough. You got this. Right. And if you don't have that, like that's what it is too. It's like the practice of overcoming the mind. Like when the mind tells you you want to come out of the pose, that's really when the work begins. And
Mm-hmm.
I've had teachers tell me that since I started practicing 13 years ago. And my practice wouldn't have expanded if the second I got uncomfortable in a pose, it's like, okay, time to come out.
Yeah.
So it's like allowing yourself to be uncomfortable in those spaces. Like I think we just always want to be like comfortable in that safe little space and our brain wants to keep us there, but there's magic in stepping out of that.
Yeah, the cage or the open,
Yeah.
not even the open room, the open world. Of course, I do have to tell the story about when I had a mouse and I accidentally left the cage door open once and the cat got the mouse.
Oh
So
no. Oh
you
gosh.
do have to be careful, folks.
Yeah.
But But that's why you have to build up these skills and trust yourself. I
Yes.
think that's really what it gets to. But I wanted to ask you, you said that you get like, people are quote unquote hating you for the long chair pose. Like, do you feel that in the class?
Oh
Like,
yeah, you see the faces, immediately. And
really?
I'm an energy reader. I've read energy since I was a child, and like I can feel it coming my way. And then of course when I bring it up to everyone's attention, like then you get the giggles, like, oh yeah, she's right.
It's interesting just because whenever I'm in that situation in a yoga class, right? And the person's like doing this long countdown, I'm like happy. I'm like, this is great. Like finally like enough stimulus or like really pushing it. And I don't know, I just never thought of I just never thought about how you could have hate in a space for yoga. It just seems so, how's that even possible? I mean, the
Oh,
whole
when
point is to go there, third eye, inward, like trying to entertain those feelings.
See, I think so. I started practicing regularly 13 years ago, and yoga was very different than it is now. So before, you could not find a class that was less than 90 minutes. It was 90 minutes and that was it. And now I think
Mm.
we've watered the practice down a lot because we've made it a fitness class. So it's like just part of like the gym schedule. So we've watered it down. Most yoga classes now are 60 minutes.
Yeah.
And that extra 30 minutes makes a big difference. And we've kind of taken the other limbs of yoga out of it, right? Like we only when we go to a physical practice of yoga, like most teachers, and I'm generalizing, this isn't everyone. I know some peers that go way beyond, but for the most part, on a surface level, that is what it is. The yoga class is just like this 60-minute fitness class. Like you can even see it. Um, this is my students are going to laugh when they listen to this episode, but we have been dialing back chaturanga a lot because what we know here in the West, chaturanga, high plank to low plank, we made up here in the West. It doesn't exist the way like that in the East. And traditionally, if we look at the traditional texts, it wasn't like that at all. It was more of an, I think they call it like 8-pointed chaturanga. I don't know the Sanskrit word for it, so don't come for me. But
They're coming.
I know it's it. So you shift forward, you lower down. It's toes, knees, hands, chest, chin on the mat, and
Mm.
then it's a pull through to cobra or upward facing dog. So it's not a push up at all in the East. And I've been bringing it to my classes the last like week and a half or so. And there are some people who are very open minded to it. They're going to give it a try. They're going to go for it. And there are some people who won't listen to me at all. They're still doing their push up. They just want the fitness. Like they don't care about anything else. And I just think that's interesting to look at, like as an observer being in front of
Mm.
the classroom. I teach about 10 to 14 classes a week. So it really gives you the opportunity to observe people practice in mass. And I always think it's very interesting the people who are not willing to step out of their comfort zone. It's like, that's what you're here for. Like, that's the true essence of the practice is to move beyond what the mind is telling you. It's not a physical practice. Like the physicality of it is a happy side effect, but really it's about being more flexible of the mind. And
Yeah.
in the Yoga Sutras, in the ancient texts, basically anything that is not that pure focused bliss state is called a disturbance of the mind. So even like the happy feelings like joy, happiness, love, whatever you want to put in there, they are all considered disturbances of the mind from Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. And I think that that is so interesting that these experiences that we're having in the yoga class of like these ups and downs of being uncomfortable, of like bliss, of all of this, it's literally all considered a disturbance of the mind. And the point of it is to focus your mind and stay in that place of center. So it's meant to distract you. It's meant to pull you out. Another thing that I always talk about in my yoga classes is if you're taking a hot yoga class, like there's no evidence that the heat has any effect on your muscles. Like it is purely about making you uncomfortable. It is designed to hot yoga class is designed to make you feel like you're going to die so that you work through those transitions of the mind of like, your mind's like, holy shit, it's hot in here. Like, oh my God, think I need water, like all of this journey that your mind goes through, it's purposely meant to take you there so that you can practice like letting that go and being like, okay, this is temporary. This too shall pass. Like, let's stay in this place of center. Let's stay in this place with the breath, and this too shall pass. So I think it's interesting. We've definitely like watered down the practice. And you see it everywhere, right? Like even with what we were talking about with astrology, like I think that it kind of comes back to the same themes.
So why do we feel this need to dilute everything? Like if we buy this, let's say like cherry juice, and we're not able to drink it, or cranberry juice would be a good example. We're not able to drink it by itself, and so we need to water everything down. Like, are we so weak now that we just don't have the constitution for it? Like,
I think it's a mental weakness. And I think that's why,
mm,
like, some of the teachers who are teaching these principles, like, people either love them or they hate them. Like, if you have the mental fortitude, this is going to be kind of a hot take, but if you have the mental fortitude to like sit with that discomfort, then like, great, I'm your teacher. But if you are kind of weak in the mind, like, I should be your teacher, but like, you probably don't have the stamina
mhm.
to see it through. And like that's sad, but I always see it as like I'm planting the seed. So even if somebody comes to my class and they absolutely hate it, like I planted a seed for them, and that seed will hopefully grow and flourish, and maybe they'll find the teacher that's for them so that they can overcome these disturbances of the mind.
And I think it's important to recognize that there are these ebbs and flows in life. And so I mean, like when I'll use myself as an example with the gym, like I like to go to the gym, I like to push myself. And I used to do that in a very tense way with like powerlifting in the past, and I had some really strong lifts. And now they're much weaker because I've been traveling. I finally just settled down. And so that got me excited to start going back to the gym and getting everything back up again and being more consistent with yoga and things of that nature. Well, it's like, okay, I landed in San Diego, and then within just a couple weeks, I had to go back to Pennsylvania for a month to see family and ship things back. So that threw all that off. And then right when I got back to San Diego again, I was like, great, let's hit it. All of a sudden, I got sick, and that was like a week long, which was very surprising, but it happened. And so you have like sometimes these waves come in that will like push you down. And so you may find yourself now not as fit, or maybe not as mentally strong, you could say, in terms of, or as mindful, whatever it is, right? Kind of pushing you down. But again, it's just what is your vector direction? What is your orientation like? Are you still pointing up, you could say, and wanting to make progress here, there, whatever? And you're not going to stop these external waves, hitting your shores. But so long as you just set your direction, and that's with a whole bunch of very small, intentful, mindful decisions and practices, then eventually you'll climb back over those setbacks. And then sometimes waves come in your favor, right? And quickly accelerate everything. And so I just feel like that's very important to recognize that we do have these external waves coming in. And when they do, not to second guess yourself and thinking that, oh, I'm now being lazy, or I'm just weak, or this, that, whatever. It's like maybe it's just it's like a tsunami, for example. But once you can finally bob your head up again, you'll realize that you still have the right direction, which is towards, self-actualization and greater spiritual development, and getting closer to those satori moments or enlightenment or God, and just being a better person, right? If we just want to really boil it down, as being a better person.
Yeah.
So it's important to recognize that. I mean, we do have those external influences coming in at times.
Yeah, and honoring those seasons of life. Like I don't know, I don't think I've ever talked about this, but like probably 2 years into teaching yoga, I took a 2 year break from teaching yoga because it
Mm.
just outside things happen. I was like not really happy with where the community was in my area, and just thought like it was watered down, and there was a lot of people that were like posers that were part of the community, and I just didn't want to be a part of it. And I took a 2 year break from teaching because I didn't know if I wanted to continue down, and that was like part of the season of of my life. And I don't think I would have gotten back to teaching or been so successful in coming back if I hadn't taken that break and just like pushed through.
Yeah, I mean those external waves that come in, they make us stronger so long as we survive them, and so it's important. But to keep working against that, or sometimes like to go with that if that's easier, but still like maintain your overall course trajectory. Um, I mean, I go through those phases with yoga where I'll do a lot of classes and then I just kind of stop going to classes. I do a lot of self practice,
Yeah.
and I find that really nice. But yeah, I just want to see society less divided, right? And less sure of themselves. I would like to see society like less sure of themselves because everyone thinks everything is this, that, exactly, like whatever,
Like black
like,
and white. Yeah.
oh my God. And it's like, just can we just remain open to these ideas? I think one of the reasons why in this podcast with Graham Hancock, with my buddy Matt, the reason why he didn't even really want to consider this interesting proposition about the Schumann resonances being this information exchange layer for ancient cultures. And that's why we see, let's say, pyramids in Mexico and pyramids in Egypt and pyramids in Southeast Asia or similar iconography and things of this nature is because he already has his explanation for that. And so this is a contrary explanation. I don't think that they have to be oppositional. I think they're very much harmonious together. But I also haven't spent 30 years writing books and, speaking about this and making, my claim on this. And so I can be open to all this stuff. But I think it's because it kind of challenged what he had already set and believes in that it was like, let's not even entertain this
Yeah.
idea.
Let's
Even
not go
though,
there.
yeah, even though it's like, that's the thing with the spiritual community, if we get back to like first principles, and I don't even think calling it the spiritual community is the right way to call it, right? But just this group of people that just seems to be more open to things. We just have to remember that kind of foundational ethos and not let ourselves be put into camps and then mice cages, because those forces are always working there to do that. And so just remaining very open, and you can take in information from this person, you can take in your own experience over there and then integrate them together however it resonates and however you see fit. But just being open to this stuff. And so that's why I like it when people present interesting ideas, but then I look into them, right, to see if there's anything to them. I don't just take it at face value. That's the other
Right.
thing too. It's like be open but discriminating.
Yeah, even this podcast, like don't take everything I say. I'm a student of this as well. Like yeah, I'm a teacher, but I'm also like forever a student. And I don't think that when it comes to these kind of philosophies that there's like a destination. There's no destination. It's I don't know. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's I find it really interesting, considering I have the YouTube channel, you have the podcast, and I'm sure you notice at times that some of the content that gets released just really resonates with people. And it's almost like this energetic, like finishing an energetic puzzle. And sometimes there's just certain transmissions that occur, and we're not the only ones doing this, of course. It happens in all aspects of life, but it's like we're really just fractals of God or universe that are helping people put puzzle pieces together and to make that aha moment. And it's not even necessarily like this conversation specifically, we haven't talked about anything, I would say, super mind-blowing or whatever, right? But it might just be that final little moment or thing that just finally clicks something for someone. And that is what's super, super important and impactful, and then sets that long-term trajectory change. And so that's really the goal.
I
More
don't
so
know.
than,
If I heard this episode like 5 years ago, it might have been a big aha moment for me.
yeah, I think that's it. We're really hoping to deliver aha moments, and they come in a whole bunch of ways. But if I can, I personally can rest happy if I deliver a lot of aha moments to other people around the world. I mean, I already have. If I continue to do that, I think that is a life well lived.
Yeah, 100,000 YouTube subscribers. That's something to celebrate.
Yeah, and people really seem to be resonating with that and liking some of the things I do. And I just want to stay very open and grounded. It's actually kind of funny because all these astrology memes would be I mean maybe well this is an audio format, but it's you have the really low IQ person. It says Gemini is a crackhead, and then you have the
I'm gonna
100
take
normal.
personal offense to this.
That's right. And then you have the 100 IQ person is saying Gemini is just like any other astrological sign. You know, there's all these nuances and other placements make up the chart, and so you have to look at the whole thing. And then you have like the 200 IQ person saying Gemini is a crackhead. And what I find so refreshing about this is that you're actually, I feel like you're very grounded for a Gemini. And
That is the
so,
biggest compliment that I could ever receive from anyone.
because I'm a Virgo, so we're both ruled by Mercury. So
Yeah.
Mercury is all about information and pulling these things, and there's an inherent duality with Mercury. This book that I read by Alan Leo called Astrology for All talks about how Mercury is the integration of, what did he say? He says the integration of, I think it was the sun, moon, and Venus all together. So it's like this higher spiritual principle. And so there is this, you know, when you are very, how do you say this? When you are really in touch with these spiritual truths, that is very grounding. And so there is, I think, a certain, if you can get past that surface level kind of Gemini or Virgo nature, that mercurial nature, which is just always wanting more information and flighty or just wishy-washy or just kind of hasn't made up their mind, right? If you can get past that, I think there's a tremendous amount of gold in there because you still retain that property of being able to see all these things and integrate it. But there's this deeper spiritual truth foundation that's really important. Everyone has their own way of accessing that. And that's really key.
Yeah, and I think for me it was going within it and for a long time I was. I think that's why, like I said, if I heard this podcast like 5 years ago, it would have been a huge aha moment for me because I was always searching for those answers outside of myself. I was going to people to facilitate Reiki for me, or,
Mm.
you know, I was going to tarot card readers or, whatever it was, like always searching for these answers. And then when I really stopped pushing away the practice of meditation and using my own tools, that's really when things opened up for me. And I kind of got this more like grounded spirit because before that, it was not the case at all. I was your classic, like crackhead Gemini that's like all over the place, here, there, and everywhere. And I naturally have like a high energy. I have a lot of fire in my chart. So I naturally have like a lot of energy, a lot of fire energy, which can be very intense for some people.
Mhm.
And I think that learning how to ground just helped me channel it in a better way. So now it's like received a little bit better. And I think that's why I ended up with a podcast. I ended up teaching. I'm like, oh, I'm kind of always on stage. But I think if I didn't find those roots and been able to really ground myself, then I don't think I would have been as successful in these kind of spaces.
I have a very similar kind of progression, I feel like, to you in that I think everyone has their own gifts and talents and passions, and we need to find outlets for those that are very healthy and constructive and benefit others generally, right? And when we do that, a lot of the other stuff, which is noise, just kind of fades away. But if we're not doing that, then I think that's when we get into this like, I need to be learning, like, let's say I need more information all the time. The future is uncertain. What's the future hold? I need some guidance because now it's looking to the external, as you mentioned. And so I find that journey to the internal really came through, okay, what are my natural, latent, God-given talents and abilities, and how can I appropriately channel those? And then if I do that consistently, all of a sudden, all that other stuff, which was a big priority or focus, because there was just this like inherent amount of uncertainty and you could say fear, right? That all goes back to fear at the end of the day. At the end of the day, that kind of just dissolves away. And so, I guess I would just like to encourage people to pursue more of their own skills and talents and passions, and then just try that out for 3 months and see where that takes them. Um, that's something I have to remind myself with is like, I mean, there's a lot of stuff I have to do now. And so it's like, am I just going to spend my time like scrolling through things and reading other viewpoints and hot takes or whatever? Or am I going to like take that time I could have done that kind of wasteful activity? Or am I going to spend that 20 minutes doing this thing that I then won't have to do tomorrow? Like get the kitchen clean or some of these other things, like get my space like nice, get my business stuff like done, set, ready, everything in order, and just making those micro decisions. I really do the big picture stuff. I really, truly 100% believe this. The big picture stuff and seeing that and like having these grand manifestations, you could say, it really does come down to making sure that every small decision that you make is done in alignment with higher spirit, or at least a very high percentage of them, because no one will bat perfect. But if you just consistently, 9 times out of 10, are making the right decisions, everything else will fall into place.
Yeah, I love that. I that's something that I'm working with now is like being consistent and that energy of consistency because well, again, I'm a Gemini, so this is sometimes a practice for me. But when like I've seen it with the podcast. This is the first year that I've been super consistent with episodes and it's flourished. It's absolutely flourished. And I'm blown away and humbled by it. And I think it comes back to also what you kind of touched on is like using your gifts to be in service. And that was something that really hit for me. Once I learned these tools, it was immediately like, oh, okay, this has lessened my anxiety, depression, whatever. Now I'm going to use this and I'm going to like scream it from the rooftops and be like, you can heal your anxiety with breath work.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And just being in service to other people. I think there's something that is so fulfilling about that. Like it's different when we're searching for ourselves. Like, yes, that's fulfilling too. But once you have that, it's kind of like, okay, now what? And this goes back to what we say in the episode with Danielle, is going back to community, going back to like loving your neighbor and like not having your head buried in your phone when you're walking down the street, like smile at a stranger. It's that human connection and that being of service that's really going to like move the needle forward as far as humanity goes,
Yeah, I guess
in my humble opinion.
if we could just snap our fingers and get rid of phones, I wonder what our society would look like 3 months later.
I'm like so torn about this though, because if that was the case, like we wouldn't be able to do this.
Yes, yes.
So I don't know. I'm torn about it. Like I mean, I think that being a millennial, I think we're really lucky because we got to see like life before and like kind of moved through the technological boom. But my family is still in some of my family is still in Italy. So before the internet was really readily accessible, before phones were basically mini computers, like when we called them, we would have to get a calling card and like we would talk to them for 5 minutes. It was like, hurry up, like say everything you
Oh.
need to say in 5 minutes and then hang up and like we'll talk to you again in 4 months. And now it's like, oh, I can just shoot them a message and they get it instantly.
Hmm.
So I'm always torn about this. And I think it's really how you use it. It's like how technology is used and having that balance of like, okay, time to unplug. Like I love nighttime. My phone goes on airplane mode. I shut the Wi-Fi routers down and like having that balance. And sometimes it's hard to do because like I want to lay in bed and scroll. But I know that it's that mental discipline to like shut it down and just be done with it and allow time of just being with my legs up the wall and just a little breath work.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I guess we were given these tools, and I guess maybe that's also the human. If we zoom out to like the million-year picture, maybe that is the evolutionary journey that we're being given right now as humans, because of all the different animals, we are the only animal that really uses tools to a very developed degree. I mean, a chimpanzee with a stick fishing for termites or something isn't then able to use that stick to just kind of scroll around or whatever, right? Like we have these amazing tools. It's not just phones, it's a whole bunch of things, also like breath work, whatever, right? All those tools. Um, and I think maybe our evolutionary push now is like, we're going to give you these tools. Can you use them appropriately? The good ones, can you use them when you need them rather than ignoring them? And then the bad ones, or the ones that have this potential to be abused, can you limit yourself to use them when only appropriate? And I guess that just comes back down to consciousness and what is it that you really want? Like, what do you really want? And how much of that desire that you have within you is, let's say, programmed, right? Because if you've been programmed with these external desires that actually aren't resonant with your spirit, then you will do those things. Whereas, I mean, a good example could be someone that is like not comfortable with their body. And so their Instagram is filled with all these model pictures, right? And they're scrolling because they're like, I want to be like that. I want to be like that. It's like, well, you were just given the body that you're given. You can do all these things to make it as nice as possible, but you'll never look like that model because they're a different person. And so that's like a behavioral program maybe that person was given at a young age. And so we just need to like, how do we find those non-resonant energies? Because that's what you could like kind of boil it down to. Is it's like some energy thought form that lives in our biofield, our aura, our fascia, our body. How do you find those and then like purge them out? I mean, yoga is a great way of doing that. Breath work is a fantastic way. But you have to do those things in the first place to do that. So
yeah. And sometimes that's the hardest part is showing up and getting there. I mean, I probably since I was 13, I had a very close like family member who would say, go to yoga, you should try yoga. And I was always like, no, 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 no. And then something happened when I turned 20 and it just clicked. And then it's become like a regular part of my life. But I think I've talked about this in the past. It goes way beyond too, like patterns of self-sabotage. Like sometimes those are programmed. Actually, I would say 99% of them are programmed, and they're programmed from ages like 0 to 9. And I've gone through the break method with Busy Gold, and she talks a lot about this, and it's all about brain repatterning and stopping those self-limiting beliefs and getting back in the driver's seat of your life to make those decisions to like stop those brain patterns that are creating bad habits, bad behaviors, self-sabotage, like you name it, and to rewire your brain to recognize them and to choose differently. And I think that's a really hard path to take. And I do hope that people in humanity are leaning towards that so that we can see a better tomorrow.
it really is like this integration period after you have some sort of experience to then integrate that. And so like a classic example that we have a ton of research on now would be psychedelics. Let's say you take a little bit of mushrooms or whatever, and you have this altered perception of reality. And my experience with psychedelics is that when you have non-resonant energies within your, let's just call it biofield, but really it's just like a whole quantum thing, right? Just like you have these things that aren't, they're like the not self, right? You have yourself, God-given, then you have these not selves that are maybe attached to you. Or your environment, you notice things in your environment, whatever. I find those all of a sudden stick out really clearly. Like everything is that's good and healthy is like green, and then all of a sudden you see this like bright neon purple light or something that's like clearly something that you need to identify and like fix, you could say. It's made very apparent. I don't actually see these colors, but that's just the metaphor. But it's really the integration. I mean, they've done research with different psychedelics showing that you can administer a psychedelic, and this is for like mice, like the study that I'm referencing. They gave this like novel psychedelic to mice, and when they and then there was like this learning maze test that they had afterwards, and they had to the mice that were given the psychedelic, if they consistently did that learning task afterwards and kept at it, that's when they showed a tremendous amount of brain plasticity and rewiring of like their reward patterns, because they were doing this maze even without being given a reward, like a little treat. Whereas the mice that weren't given it would not do the maze without the treat. But meanwhile, of course, getting better at the maze is better for you because now you're, a little smarter, a little sharper, things of this nature. But if they took that maze away, they gave the psychedelic and then took the maze away for like a week, none of the effects clicked and the plasticity didn't click. And so I think that's an important part of this is like just being aware of that integration period and being aware of the consistency that you need to show throughout that. And so in the classic example, this is not what I'm like, let's say, recommending to people. This is just an example that's very well researched, is that you can give a psychedelic and then there's that integration period where you should then meditate on what came up for you, journal, however you want to do that, work through that. But this goes for a whole host of things. And you could do all the psychedelics in the world, but if you don't do that integration, you're just going to be in a karmic loop now where you're not addressing these things that are there and not actually, you see that bright neon purple light, but you're not actually grabbing it and moving it out of your space. And so it's like you see it and then it fades back and everything's like the same muted colors again because now you don't have that heightened perception. And then you see it again, you're like, oh yeah, I forgot that thing was there. And then it fades back and it's just like this loop. But that integration is really, really important.
Yes, I talk about this in my yoga classes too, because Shavasana is an integration pose. So you see it in the people who
Mm.
are like, when Shavasana is coming up, they're like grabbing their mat, they're leaving. It's like you're missing the best part of the practice. Like if you don't integrate what you've just learned, like what was the point of being here at all?
Shout out to Stephanie at Oh My Yoga in Camp Hill, Pennsylvania, because she had an awesome class. That was a lot of fun, but she always gave us a super long, juicy Shavasana.
Oh,
Like
I
it
love
was,
that.
oh, it was so nice, and it was long enough to actually get into those deeper states and to do that integration. Whereas a lot of classes, it's like, okay, Shavasana, corpse pose, and then it's like 3 minutes later, they're like, okay, start wiggling your toes. I'm like, I was still wiggling them the whole time. Like I hadn't even calmed down yet. Like, oh my God, this is 3 minutes for like this 70-minute long class. Like it needs to be a sufficient length of time. And Stephanie would do like these 15-minute Shavasanas or longer, which was like the perfect length. And you could stay there longer if you wanted. But yeah, that's a really important thing too. And I guess that comes back to giving ourselves time, recognizing that we have time and that we're not like starved of time. I think there's like this fear that we don't have enough time. And it's like we don't, but we do.
Yeah, I agree. And it's like, what are you using your time on? Like my friends or like students that are always like, I don't have time to meditate. I'm like, what was your screen time last week?
Ooh, yeah.
Do you have time? I think you just have to reallocate your time.
Yeah, yeah. Or even I get some people that say my videos are too long on YouTube. And these are like, I go in depth into the science and everything. And a lot of people love it. Some people are like, it's too long. And that's fine. Like, they're like, can you make like short form content or TikToks and stuff? It's like, you're not going to learn this stuff with the TikTok. And everyone has their own way of doing it. Like like if I was listening to this podcast, I'd be washing my dishes right now. I'd be sweeping up and cleaning around the house, right? It's not like I'm just sitting there listening to it the whole time. Like I'd be doing things, but I'd be actively engaged with it at the same time. So it's like you can find ways to work in this like long form, really deep, impactful information, you could say, while still getting stuff done. Like, but I guess maybe that's a more mercurial thing where we can
Yeah.
multitask better.
Yeah. I don't know.
Um,
This is like maybe the Gemini in me, but I speed up the audio times two. And I'm also doing the things like your
yeah,
brain
you can
gets
do
used to
times
it.
two. Yeah, I recently started editing my videos. I found out if I hit L on my keypad for Premiere Pro, it speeds it up. And so it makes editing a little faster. And then when I go back and I hit L again to slow it down, I'm like, oh my God, I sound so stupid because everything is so slow. And it's just, yeah, your mind does get used to it. Of course, I'm not, stupid just because it's a little slower than the 2x speed. But you do get used to it. I do like certain things to be at normal pace so you can get that timing. But other things that are kind of informational and, it's just really about getting all the info. Yeah, I mean, speed that guy up.
Maybe that's our Mercury flexing there. We just want that
I,
information and we want it in double the time, like half the time.
there is a little bit of a of an information starved aspect. I've been encountering that myself, where I just feel like so that's the other thing. The reason why this got brought into my mind and my sphere is because I'm grappling with some of this myself and wanting more and more and more and wanting some certainty, but there is no certainty at the end of the day other than yourself and like what you can do. And so that's why I wanted to jump on here so we can have this conversation because I feel like us talking about this hopefully could be helpful to some other people because I really feel like I'm just picking up on everyone's their own individual, but I also feel like I am very much picking up on a collective vibe with that and just wanted to work through that as best we could and just to reaffirm some of these things that we know work. One of the things I say is that we like work done is work done. Like if you're like the pyramids, you build a pyramid, no one's going to take that pyramid in Giza down, right? The big one, like no one's going to take it down. And we have to remind ourselves that like, with time, paying attention to all these little details, the big picture starts to materialize, like all that work is done. It's not going away. Erosion's a pretty slow process. Building is a pretty quick process. So keep building, building, building. Don't worry about erosion. Take breaks if you need to, and everything will work out.
Oh, I love that. That's the perfect message to end on. I'm so glad that you came back on the podcast. I think this is a really great conversation. And like I said, if I found this 5 years ago, I think it would have been just what I needed to hear.
Yeah, jump off that cliff. Go out of the cage. Just make sure you don't do it in a house where there is a cat that wants to eat you. I feel
Thank you
bad
so.
for
I
poor
know.
Molly.
R.I.P. Rip.
Yeah.
But cats will be cats.
Yeah, I
That's
mean,
like the best
well,
part of felines. I have two.
I
I've
mean
had them
that
since
is
college.
that's the like the journey of life. Like Molly, maybe this is also the metaphor. Like Molly did walk out of the cage, right? And maybe that was a step that little mouse needed to take, and then it went through a reincarnation process, and maybe Molly became like a cat or a dog or a human or a bird or something. I don't know, but I feel like that is kind of in many ways the signal that God needs. Like it just needs, it's not that you need to like step out of the cage and then God's like, okay, I need you to like examine the entire room or the house to find a little golden cheese nugget. Maybe it's just you just need to step out of the cage to show that you did it, and then God gives you the next stage, the reward, the bounty, whatever it is. Maybe
So I
that's
love
what it
that.
is.
My grandmother, she was a great spiritual teacher of mine. And I think even though she's passed, she still is. But she used to say all the time, God helps those who help themselves. So if you're not taking those action steps, like you're sending mixed messages to him, so he can't give you what you want. It's like the same thing, you're manifesting, and the people who are like, oh, I manifesting doesn't work for me. It's like, okay, but you can't just like sit and think about it. Like, what are the action steps you're taking to like bring that energy towards you?
Yeah. Yeah, I find also manifesting is like doing the thing and then actually totally disassociating from that thing. And that's when things happen. Like I'll, let's say, like release a video and then I'll take a nap, and that's when the videos blow up. Something like
Yeah.
that. Because I'm in like this unconscious astral space, and that's when all the magic happens.
Not like refreshing the analytics. Like,
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So, yeah, hopefully our conversation had some value for some people. I really hope that, and I appreciate you having me on the podcast, and my mind feels a little clearer now
oh, I love
uh,
that.
that we could work through and process some of these individual, but also very much collective things. We are all one. Dr. Bronner's is on my soap bar. I believe it. So, I hope that this was valuable to everybody.
It absolutely was. Thank you for being here. It's always a pleasure. Open invite anytime you want to come back on. There's always like tons of golden information. I think spirit really guides these episodes, and whatever is meant to come out for the collective is what kind of happens here. So thank you for being here. Thank you all for listening. If this resonates, please like, subscribe, share with somebody you love, and I'll see you next time.